So how is everybody doing? This is our third session of the day of the Ortus Developers Week 2017. We are here to learn a lot. We have today Gavin, who is gonna talk about the real-world ContentBox microservices. There is the website right here, ortusolutions.com/ODW, so you can check the schedule. Please follow us on Twitter, and the hashtag is ODW2017. What is ODW? It's a free week-long online conference led by Ortus team and the community members. All sessions will be recorded, and you can check at them at ortusolutions.com/ODW, and we will share with you guys the slides and some content. Why we do this? Well, because we love training, we love education, and this is for you guys as developers. So I hope you can take advantage of all this information, of the products that we are showing here. We want the community to get involved and to adopt new technologies as well. Ortus Solutions, we are a professional open source, and we give training, support and mentoring, architecture and design, server tuning, security and setup, web development. We do a lot of stuff, so whatever you need, you can always ask for help. We will be here to help and also to entertain, because we have mariachi singing included. So since we are an open source company, we will require a sponsor as well. As you know, we would like to keep the forgebox.io alive. That way we can keep our documentation and downloads. You can help us just with $10 a month. And this is the schedule, November 7. This is the third session of the day. Please check the schedule for the rest of the week. And two important announcement. We will be having a CF Summit RESTful Services Bootcamp next week on Las Vegas. So that is gonna be so much fun. I hope you can make it. Remember that the seating is limited. There is a link with a discount code ODW2017 for you guys, so you can get on a spot. Also, next year in April 25th to April 27th, we will have the Into the Box 2018 in Houston, Texas. It's a nice conference that we will be hosting, and those are the links that you can visit to get your tickets now. Okay, now it's your turn, Gavin. I'm gonna stop my sharing.
Okay, great. Thank you everybody for coming. Let me share my screen. Let me know when you guys can see the slides.
Good.
Good, okay. Just moving my stuff so I can see a little better when if you guys make some comments in the chat, etc. Okay, so first things first, thanks again for coming. I know that this week gets really busy with 3 sessions a day, 5 days of the week. Can't believe we had 4 sessions a day last year and the previous year. So, but thanks for making time. And if you're watching the recording, well then thanks again for watching after the fact. But first thing is Row ContentBox Microservices. I crossed that out because I don't really have a whole lot of time to dive into the microservices piece, and I think John's done a great job in previous sessions. So I'm just looking more about the ContentBox Docker deploys and the ContentBox image and what you can learn from that image and maybe pull into your app if you're not using ContentBox. So let's get started. So about me, nobody cares. So let's just move on. So Docker images. Auto Solutions is built and supports a few Docker images. The most common and popular one is the Auto Solutions /CommandBox. So that's probably what everyone's familiar with and everyone's been using. And that's a great image. It gets you up and running real quick. And that's done everything I've ever needed. ContentBox is a new one that we've specially built for ContentBox. Basically, what it does is add several bells and whistles to help you get your ContentBox app ready to deploy to Docker. So before we dive too much into that, let's look at the images a little more. So the CommandBox Docker image, you can find all the information here. It gives you CommandBox ready to go. Basically, what you do is you just volume mount in your files to the app directory and then start the server of your choice. The server of your choice can be defined in your server.json. And so basically, it's just a really neat way to just get up and running just like you were on your local machine. So there's a lot of great things in it. You have access to all the different commands and CFconfig and those types of things are available to install and run on there. And the app is yours. So you can run anything you want. Doesn't matter what framework. If it's legacy, you can choose whatever you want to do and get it up and running. The only thing is, though, is setting up your data sources. You have to sort of do that yourself and setting up some settings and users and everything. That's all your own. So, CommandBox is a great starting point, but it's not everything. So with the ContentBox Docker image, we went a little further. And when I say we, I don't mean me. I actually mean Luis and John. So basically, Luis and John went through and worked on this, and they've added a whole lot of great things into it. And so I'm going to sort of show you how to use it. Then I'm going to show you the nuts and bolts of it and show you how you can use it even if you're not using ContentBox. So basically, it is built on top of CommandBox. The way Docker works, you have layers. So one layer is the CommandBox layer, and then we just built things on top of it. So we get all the goodness of the CommandBox image, and we get a few extra things. So we have all the data source configuration for ContentBox built into this ContentBox image. We also have distributed caching for content, RSS feeds, etc. Also has the environment variables to go from environment into ContentBox settings. So you can actually use environment variables to override some of your ContentBox settings. Also has support for embedded H2 database. So when you run through the installer, you can just have it install to an H2 database, or you can set up your database config as I mentioned earlier too. So a lot of the stuff obviously works based on how ContentBox is set up, but if you are using ContentBox, this just makes life easier. So let's look at a little bit more. So the first thing I want to mention is the Express version. So when you start up this ContentBox image, you have an option of using Express, which by default just uses the memory H2 database. It's great for setting up for testing. If you start with a variable express equals true and install equals true, it sets up the database. ORM does its things, creates all the tables. It starts up the installer, and you can set up your installer. And it's really easy to get up and running in Docker by just using docker run -p8080. So we get the port set. And then you pass in that environment variable, express equals true, install equals true, and then we're defining the image, which is Auto Solutions /ContentBox. So just with a couple of those things, you can get up and running with ContentBox to play with, to try. If you haven't used it before, this is a great way to do it. You can test the installation, you can actually add everything, and that works great. So if you haven't tried ContentBox, this is a great way to do it. So I would try it with that. The issue, though, of course, with Docker is persisting data. So Docker doesn't care about your data and your files. And if you want to keep it, you've got to persist it. So here we mount 2 volumes into the H2 data folder and the media folder. That way, the data that we're storing in our H2 database is actually going to be pulled out of the Docker image into a folder, and the media folder will be the same as well. So if you upload files into your Docker image, normally they go into Docker and they're great until you kill that image and they will disappear. So with the volumes here, we can actually just make a couple of folders in the directory we're in. We have a ContentBox-DB folder, and that's where we're going to mount a volume into the data/ContentBox/DB, which is the mounting point for the database. And then the next one, on the next line, you see volume ContentBox media, and that directory is mapped into the app/include/shared/media. So these are the two paths here. And actually, I'm just going to go back. If you click on this link here, it'll actually take you to the Docker Hub for the ContentBox, and it has a lot of this examples and documentation too, by the way. We will share the slides, but just wanted to let you guys know if you wanted to follow along or sneak ahead, you can do that there. So environment variables. So we've already mentioned a couple of environment variables you can use, like express and install, but there's also several other ones that this image gives you right out of the bat. So you got the framework reinit password, because I don't know about you guys, but when using ColdBox, you always go and change those passwords, hopefully. Go and change those passwords. So when you're spinning up a Docker image, they're all going to be the same, right? Well, this gives you the option to, when you spin it up, to change that reinit password. You can also change the session storage, telling where you want to store that. Distributed cache, you can choose if you like to use the built-in default JDBC, or if you actually want to use one of the other distribution options. You can also define where you want the H2 directory. So if you want to put it in a different location than the default, you can do that. And this is a cool feature too, ContentBox_default_**. So if you prefix any environment variable of ContentBox_default_, and then you rename your variable, on load, this will actually go in and read through the DSL and say, okay, ContentBox variables default is actually a site thing, so that's part of the multi-tenant that we're supporting going forward. We're just making sure that's all ready. But any variable you have there will actually load into the settings for ContentBox. So it gives you a nice way to load them. I will mention a caveat there, but we'll worry about that later. You can also set ORM secondary cache if you have an EH cache set up or not, and you can also define the dialect if you want to be specific. You can have it auto-detect, which works pretty good, but being able to define it directly is a nice option too. Some of those dialects, they don't auto-detect very well. Okay, so database connections. Okay, so database connections is obviously the most important thing. You can't really do much without a database. And in the old days, when you set up a server, start an app, you go to Lucy configuration or Adobe, and you go in there and change everything up. Then you'd be, okay, that kind of works okay when you're deploying an app on your machine or a server, but when you're doing Docker, you can't really do that. So we have environment variables set up, and the ContentBox is set up to look for those environment variables and set things up as needed. So here, we're going to basically just show you two different ways. Now, there is a difference between the Adobe Cold Fusion servers and the Lucy options as well. So we have two different methods. The DB driver configuration, which has a few more variables. Usually it's used for Adobe Cold Fusion, the MS SQL especially, but DB class configuration is usually the default what you see in Lucy when you copy the database connection into your application CFC, etc. So we'll look at these here. So the MySQL setup, like so this one's probably more familiar. So we'll ignore the top part of the Docker, but instead of doing an H2 database here, we're actually defining the DB connection string. So the connection string, this looks just like what you'd see if you went to Lucy. So you have the MySQL / the host name, the port, and then the database name here, and then a couple of extra little doodads to make your date times work nicely, and your encoding is UTF-8. Now the class here, this is the Java class for the driver, and then you have your database username and password. Now that's basically a pretty common one, but if you're working with Adobe or the MS SQL, you may need to use the next one here. So this one has the DB driver and the host and the port and the database name all separate. So this is a different option. Just depending on your database you're connecting to, you may want to use a different one here. You'll also see it on the bottom line here, we're using a volume too. So that -v is for volume. The PWD is the working directory. And then so basically you're saying, from where I'm running this, the ContentBox media, we want to map that into the apps include shared media folder that we mentioned earlier. So this is how we can set up the database connections here. Now, another thing is distributed cache. So ContentBox by default has a lot of things, caching as far as pages and RSS feeds, etc. So when you're working on a cluster, you usually want to make sure that this cache is distributed just to save energy. So by default, it's configured to use the database. It's not really the real caching, that's why you call it pseudo caching here. It does allow some caching in the database, but ideally, if you're going to really scale this, you want to move to something like Redis or Couchbase. And so we have some custom configuration files, which is the CacheBox configuration file here. And if you look at this repo, the Docker ContentBox distributed has some setup. So let's just look at that real quick. I think we're going pretty good on time. So in this repo here, you'll see that inside the config folder, there's a different CacheBox CFC. Let me blow this up a little bit so you guys can see better. So in here, we have a distributed cache equals to the provider, Redis callbox provider, and then this is the server cache, so you can set this up and configure as needed. And if we go back, we can also look at the callbox CFC. And so there's some changes here. Let me see if I can find them. It's always fun. This is distributed. Maybe I missed it. Oh, there you go. Storage is cache storage, cache name is distributed. So those couple little settings there allow you to make those modifications as needed. So it's a great little addition as well. Like I said, by default, we do use JDBC CacheBox setup, so you can just use the database, and that's what I'll use in my examples today. That does work pretty well. So what if you have a ContentBox site already? So obviously the ContentBox image with Docker, it already has a site and everything set up. So what do? So you got two options here. So you can extract your changes from your old site and mount them and copy them into the Docker image. And we'll go through and look at that first. But the other option is you can update your existing site to use some ContentBox Docker image magic. So all those things that I mentioned basically are changes we've made to ContentBox. And so we'll have a look and see what we've done. And some of those things can actually be done to any site, whether it's ContentBox or not. So you may want to, look at adding some of those to your site if you're not using ContentBox and want to get some of the same type of goodness. Let's look through at extracting your changes first. So, okay, so let's start up a site with a ContentBox image. So this here is the example that I'm going to be working off of here. So we're going to do a Docker run, choose support. We're going to set the admin password of the server using cfconfig, which is a great tool. You got to use it. Whoop, too fast. The DB class. So we're using MySQL. So we set the class. We set the connection string. And this one here, I'm using a local IP. We're using port 3306, and Golf GK is the database name. And the username is root, and the password is a secret password. Okay. So let me actually pull that up. See George asking questions about ContentBox as a progressive web app. Slow down, George. Let's just work on this first. Okay. Sorry, just trying to get my stuff moved over. Too many screens, and then all shared. All right. Okay. And I can't find my thing. I hate it when that happens. There we go. Okay. So here we go. Let's try and start this up. So you'll see some different messages popping out of the site. You see that the rewrite flag is detected. You see that it's using Lucy4 and which port. You'll see some other things as the message goes through. I'm always running these in server mode so I can actually sort of see them as they're running. I like to see that, especially when I'm in dev mode. You can run them as a daemon with the -D option, but I do like to see stuff as it gets spit out. So basically we have this up and running now. So let's jump back here. I'm going to pull up Portainer. I did a previous session at the roadshow, the container roadshow we did a while back. So if you guys jump back to that, you'll see start playing with Docker. So a lot of the other stuff that I'm sort of skipping over here, you'll see in my presentation there. There's a recording here, and my slides are available as well. But we have a lot of information in here. So if you're missing a piece, it might be in that presentation, just so you know. So we used Portainer in that one. So I'm going to just refresh my options here. So you'll see here, I've got a new container spun up. It's on port 8080. This is the image we basically just run up there. So if we actually click on the name here, we can see some of the environment variables we're passing in, etc. So we see the password and the driver, etc. So we can see that that's up and running. So let's try that out. Always the way. Yeah, I know it's a link to my database, but only. Hold on a second. Sorry, guys. It always happens when you try and show a live example, doesn't it? Okay, let me just kill it and try one more thing, and we'll move on so I don't leave you hanging there. Okay, so I'm just running something else in the background. Yeah, everyone's laughing at me for having a fail live example. And I've got another example later, and I purposely left it running so I wouldn't have that problem. So anyway, let's jump back into this while it starts up, and we'll sort of keep presenting. So sorry, guys. Okay, so this is starting up. We got it to run, but I had a problem with my password. I think I tried to reset my password so I wouldn't have to show my actual database password in here, and I messed it up. So I apologize for that. So this one here, we get a site up and running. But when we click around it, there'll be a few issues. So when you look at the folder structure, you're thinking, where are all my files? Because basically to start that up, we had no files in there. So we're really starting a plain ContentBox site with a database. So where's everything else? So it's kind of strange. You have to think a little differently when you're working with a Docker setup like this compared to the one I showed in my other demonstration where you actually had a site, and then you added the whole entire site sort of into an image. And so at this point, we already have ContentBox in the image. We're just trying to figure out, okay, what do we actually need to change? And the cool thing is not much. So what we may want to do is we want to mount any persistent files we wouldn't need as a volume. And then if there's any changes, we can either mount them into the volume dynamically. And the other option is to actually copy the changes in. So if you did a Docker file, you can actually copy some files into the Docker image and then save it as a new image. So instead of using the ODW2017/ContentBox image, you could actually use the gpickin/my website image. The example I'm going to show later, I'm actually doing is a live public site. And so I don't actually have the keys set up or anything, but you can actually do private repos too, so not everyone in the world can see your image as well. But that's the other option. But mounting the volumes in it is actually pretty interesting. It's pretty easy, and it's definitely different way to think about it though. So don't be put off by feeling weird when you're doing this. So let's add our media into the image. So with ContentBox, obviously there's a media folder that has all your media. Now, for this to work, we really want to make sure that we have that persisted, because if someone uploads an image and you've got 2 or 3 different Docker images up there, you want that image to be available on all of them. So you need to make sure you map something in. So this one we're mapping in. I'm just working my www Docker ContentBox folder. So in there I have a ContentBox media folder. So I'm going to map that in. So in that folder, we have all the content that we want for the site. So let me show you what that looks like. And you're seeing all the files right now. But inside ContentBox media, we have a set of files here. So some interesting ones: the driving range, and some good food, and the range bucket bowl. So that is the folder that we're mapping in. So that we just map that there, tell we want to map it to, and away we go. So let's see if this is actually spun up now. Nope. Let's try port 81 in case I used the wrong example. There we go. Let's see. So it looks like I did have a database password wrong. So everything's starting to load now. Aha. Okay, so let's go back and look at some of this output real quick. So you'll see that there's a lot of stuff being spat out here. It's probably pretty scary to see all this, but most of it says hibernate, so you can kind of ignore that unless you have a problem. You see all the server home. You see all the web.inf files being spat out as well. So all that's done. But when we get to the end, we'll see some of the interesting pieces, and we'll go over some more of that as we go through. But you'll see here, it's talking about module service being loaded. And here you'll see the ContentBox goodness. ContentBox config overrides loaded. So you'll see that has the cache name is set to JDBC, and the content cache name is set to JDBC, and the settings cache is JDBC. And you'll see that the ContentBox environment overloads loaded. You'll see that this directory root is loaded here too. So now that we actually have it running, I can show you the site. So if we go into the admin, and log in. We'll see a bunch of the contents all in there. If we go to the content and go to the media manager, we should see all those files that were just in there. So now here we got a media goes here. I'm going to rename this. Now, if this was part of the actual image and I renamed this and I shut down this service and then restarted it, it would be reset because obviously it was part of the image. But since it's a volume, now you'll see that this file has been changed as well. So that's how the volumes work. Hoping that's pretty clear, but sometimes it's nice to see that in action. Okay. So that's the ContentBox media folder. So we see how that works now. And I kind of cheated with the instruction here. So the one I loaded just actually hit the theme. So by default, if I hadn't have loaded my theme in using this volume right here, you would have actually got an error because the theme itself wouldn't exist inside the Docker image. So to show you, I'm going to oops, sorry, jump in here to Portainer. I'm going to refresh the containers here. So you'll see our new container. It's actually running a gpick and cb version because that's the last one I had that worked. So I just spun that one up. But if I go into the console here, let me just install Nano because I like Nano. Okay, so apps, modules, ContentBox, themes is where the themes are. So this Golf NK, this is actually a volume that mounted in here. So it looks like it's actually in here. The image does not include it. So if you have a special theme, like I said, you can always build an image using a Docker file. We'll try and run over that real quickly today too. But if not, you can just mount that in there. But usually something like a theme, you're not going to change very often. It should be in your repo and it should be, added to your image. But that's how you can do that. So now that's why you see the site with a theme and everything's loaded and it's all working the way it should. So as I said before, the other option is to add magic into the existing site. So how does ContentBox's Docker image do all of this? Well, there's a few secrets here. One of them is that some of this is already in ContentBox 3.7. So I'm going to show you that. You also want to add some code and functions to your application CFC. And you'll want to add some config to your config CommandBox.cfc, and you want to add some to your config cachebox.cfc. So let me walk you through that real quick. So show you some of those things. Like I said, if you already have an existing ContentBox site and you just want to make it into your own image built on top of the CommandBox image, you can do these changes. So there's some new configuration in the module config for ContentBox. So I'm going to pull this up and we'll go through it. So line 123. So on this onload here, you'll see that there's some load config overrides and load environment overrides. And if we scroll to the top, let's see, is it? No, I was wrong. It's not in there. It's actually in the environment one. So in here, they're using the osystem.get environment, and the system is the Java lang, so that's how they're actually loading this. So this function here basically loads all the environment settings, loops through them all, looking for that ContentBox underscore default underscore a key, and then basically going through and creating an override struct from that. So this little function here goes ahead and adds all these settings, but this is actually in 3.7 already. So if you're using ContentBox, you'll already have this in your code. This load override configs here is another one. So this is actually loading ContentBox DSL from inside of your CommandBox configuration. So there's actually some code for that. So as I said, that's already in there. So if you're not using ContentBox, you may have to replicate something like this, but if you're using ContentBox, you already get that benefit. Oops, wrong one. So those are those 3 line settings in the module config. Now the application CFC, there's a couple of changes. So new in the Docker image here, this is how it actually gets built up. And if you guys are interested, you can look through this repo and sort of see. But in this application CFC, there's quite a few changes in here. The first one is line 13. You'll see here we got the created object for the java.lang.system, so you can get those environment variables to use throughout the site. And you'll see here on line 20, you see that the session storage is being set by checking this system environment for this variable. If not, it's just defaulting to ContentBox. There's also some settings here for cluster, session cluster equals true, and a few other settings as well. There's also the data source mix-in, which we'll talk about, but the session storage from the environment variable we just looked at. So we're also including a file too. So here, before the ORM settings, we have this config/data source mix-ins, which we'll get to soon, but that's how basically all the data source environment variables are looked at, and then the data source is created based on your environment variables. And the secondary ORM cache is also there as well. So if you see here, there's some environment variables being checked here as well. So obviously you guys can set this up to configure whatever you'd like in your app. Just use the same type of setup where you read in the environment variables, and then you can just choose some, some settings based on that, and then give it a smart default just in case. Okay, so then the next thing that we changed up was in the ContentBox CFC. So in the Docker image, there's a new ContentBox CFC. Again, we load the Java environment variables here. So if we look at line 13, you'll see this is being done here as well. And then as we just scroll down, you'll see the reinit password. Remember, we mentioned that was one thing you could reset. So this is how this is done. We scroll down a little further. You'll see the distributed cache, again, is read from the environment variable. And also here, the storage is set. So you can actually use the sessions cache for the sessions. So logging in the sessions are distributed now too. And you'll see here that this ContentBox runtime overrides. Remember, we had the environment overrides and the runtime overrides. This runtime overrides here allows us to set the distributed cache correctly. So ContentBox settings default, this is one of the functions. So by having these in here, that ModuleConfig.cfc actually pulls these in and sets them inside your settings. This also checks here to see if the installer setting exists or not. If it does not, sorry, then it uses the flash scope. If it does, it doesn't need it, so it doesn't do it in installer mode. So yeah, so that's what the ContentBox CFC had changed. And I scrolled down and showed you all these already, but there are outline numbers there if you want to look at them later. So CacheBox. So normal ContentBox CacheBox setup looks like this. So if you have 3.7, you installed it, or if you upgraded to it, you would have to manually make these changes. But we have a default cache, and then we have other caches for template, and then we have set up for sessions, and that's what it looks like from the repo. But with the Docker image, we set up a few extras. So again, we have the CacheBox, the default cache set up, but then we have the template cache here, and then we have the sessions cache, which now is actually running off the data source, which is ContentBox data source, and the table is CacheBox sessions. So I can show you the database, actually see the sessions table there and being used. And you also have the JDBC, which is the storage cache now. And so by default, these are the ones that the ContentBox image uses, and those are the changes into that file. Okay. I missed one file on here, so I want to just show you manually real quick. I forgot to show you the data source mixin, so let me do that. I'll update my slides before I post them. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so this data source mixins file was included from the application CFC, remember? So basically what that does, the system engine looks for the engine type, and then depending on the engine and also your express setting here, decides if it should do an H2 database or not. If it's doing H2, it already knows all the settings, so it just sets it up here. The traditional RDBMS, basically, if you were looking at using Adobe here, we need to use the driver. So we mentioned before with like MS SQL and Adobe, you use the driver, and you'll need the host, the port, the name, the user, and the DB port. So it loops through here to make sure you have them all. If you have them all, then it'll actually set up this configuration and add them all in here, just like you would if you copied and pasted it from like the Lucy configuration or the Adobe configuration to your application CFC. If there is a password, it sets it. If not, it does not. And then here, if you're using the DB class, then the connection string, the class, and the user are required. So again, it loops through those to make sure it gives you a warning if it doesn't exist, and then sets up the database configuration for you. If there's a password, it passes it. And also, if there's the SQL server is the database, it'll actually set the dialect for you too, which is kind of nice. And again, sets the dialect here as well if you want to override it specifically. And then here, basically, this is where it actually sets the data source in your application. for ContentBox equal to whatever you set up. So that's all the magic that basically takes all those environment settings for the database and makes them work. So again, a lot of cool things. I mean, you can obviously recreate them, but it comes out of the box with the ContentBox image. It's kind of nice. We're using variations of this over the last few years with environment variables and property files and that type of thing for customers. And this is the streamlined approach that we've gone and done here. So before I go to the next slide, does anyone have any questions? Everyone went quiet after they stopped laughing at me for messing up. Okay, I take that as a good sign. Okay, so live coding moment of truth. We already had one and it failed. So I'm going to show you what I've done already, and then I'll show you how it's actually working. So deploying to the cloud. What I've done is I went and set up a DigitalOcean server a couple minutes ago, or I guess an hour ago now, roughly, just before we started the session. I'll go through and walk through it, but I want to show you these commands here because all my database passwords in production are a lot more live. But basically we run this command. So again, I'm running as a daemon this time. So it's in the background. The port 8080. I'm going to set my password, which I probably shouldn't have done that because you guys can get into my password now. Maybe I should go change it. The environment variable for DB class. So we're passing in the driver, we're passing the connection string. So this is the database server. Now this is not on DigitalOcean, so that's why this is a little slow. Normally you'd want to have it local to the service you're using. Port 3306, this is the database name that I'm using. And again, the same REST connection string. I have the user secret and the password of top secret. And now with DigitalOcean, what I've done is, since it's not a local machine, we have to worry about volume. So in certain regions of DigitalOcean, you can set up volume. So I have a volume set up in San Francisco. So here I have a volume mounted, and inside of that, I uploaded some files. So let me show you my FileZilla. This is my mount here. So this is my mount, my volume SFO2 -1. So I have my ContentBox media folder here. So this had all those files in here. And I also had my theme. So I have my Gulf NK theme in here. And so what I've done is I've just mounted it in here. So I mounted the volume SFO201 ContentBox media folder to the app/include/shared/media folder. And I also mounted the volume SFO2-1 themes Gulf NK into the themes folder, into that Gulf NK folder inside the themes. And again, this GPIC and CB is just an image I was messing with. And then I also set up a second instance, which had the port 81. So I actually have two instances up and running. I'll show you those in a minute. So this is running on port 8081. And again, everything else is the same. It's still sharing those two same volumes. And everything's set up there. It's sharing the content, it's sharing the theme. That way it's not loaded into the image for everything. So let's actually go look at those. Again, I did say it's pretty slow. So this is my IP, my Docker port 8080. This is the site. I can click around. If I go to the grill, I should see some of the media working. Let's see if that's actually set up and running. A couple of the images there. If I go to port 8081, I look on the back end. If I go to system and I go to the geek settings, I can come in here into the cache box and I can see the different caches. I can actually go to the JDBC cache here. There you go. So you see some of the content that's being cached, and this is all being cached in the database. So it's actually sharing the cache between them. If I look at the configuration here, you'll see it's using a JDBC store, and it's putting it in this table here. So let me see if I can get to the table. Pull out my database here. So if I show you this here, this is the database table with some of the content in here. So if I refresh it, so you'll see that it's just been updated in the last couple of minutes as I've been hitting different things. If I log out of one, it should log me out of the other two. There we go. So now I'm logged out of both. If I log into this one, and then I try and get back to this one. It should let me in. Yep. So it's working pretty nicely. So let me show you in the DigitalOcean just how I set this up here. So what I did is I basically spun up just one droplet, just for a example to show everybody here. So this one example here, it's just a simple little 2 gig setup with an IP address, and then I mounted a volume. So I created one volume here. Just a little 1 gig volume to put all my extra stuff. So inside of that, if I look at config instructions, so basically I just went through, set them all up, and that's where, by copying this function and run, that's where it actually mounted it to that location for me here, the volume SFO201. And just to actually set up a new one, I'll just show you what I did. So I went to one-click apps. By doing that, you can just get Docker installed on the latest version of Ubuntu, and that's what ours are based off of. So it's basically just a setup for a simple Docker setup, and from there you can run your commands. So let me show you what it actually looks like running on my PuTTY. So here I have my 2 containers set up and running. These are the different container IDs. This is when they were created, the ports are running on, and their names right there. I haven't got Portainer set up on here, so we can't actually log in and see that. But that's all you need to do is basically run that command. If we click on this here, we'll get the option to choose the different sizes, add the block storage if we wanted, etc. And obviously you have to make sure it's in one of the regions that supports block storage. And then you can set up your SSH keys and choose your droplet and away you go. So within a minute or two, that was up and running. I ran my commands here, ran both of them one after the other, and they were up and running. So like I said, I would want to run them, but I don't want to do that with I don't want to really do that and show you my secret password. So, but try to get through that in an hour. I know time is really hard to come by these days, especially with the Solidus Developer Week. So if anyone has any questions, let me know. Otherwise, if you want more, please visit the Solidus Solutions website. I did say we had the Container Roadshow up there. We've got a ContentBox Roadshow up there. Also, the Slack channel, Box Team has a separate channel just for Solidus-related questions. So if you want to get a little more deep into some of the questions, we have a Slack channel just for that. And then we're all on Twitter as well. CF Summit and the training. Javier, myself, Luis, and Brad, and Jorge will all be in Vegas next week. So if you can make it out there, that'd be great. We have a couple of seats left, I think. get in quick. But obviously you can bug us in general about this stuff. We love to talk about it. And then next year, Into the Box. Docker was big last year. It's going to be even bigger this year. So if you guys have time, Into the Box is a great 3-day event with 1 day of training and 2 days of conferences. And we'll have lots of time to talk there. So anybody else have any questions? Hope this was useful. Please someone say something.